Duzen the inheritance. The warehouse burned with such intensity that the docks glowed orange, and Leo emerged from the drainage pipe, covered in the slime of the dead, holding a burner phone that contained the recording of his sister confessing to poisoning their father. By the time the police arrived, the Mercedes was already surrounded, and Sarah's plane ticket to Buenos Aires lay soaked and useless on the concrete. But all of that had started 24 hours earlier, in the quiet of a dead man's study, with a single silver key. 13 hours before the fire, Leo sat on a low mahogany stool in front of his late father's roll-top desk. His fingers trembled slightly as he inserted the small silver key into the lock of a hidden side drawer. The wood creaked as he pulled it open, the sound thick and heavy in the apartment's silence. Dust motes danced in a single beam of light from the window. Leo's breath came shallow. He had spent the past 3 days sorting through his father's belongings, the clothes, the books, the ordinary detritus of a life ended. But the desk had always felt locked away from him, even before the actual lock was engaged. His father had worked here for 40 years. Some spaces held their secrets. Leo's fingers reached into the back of the drawer, brushing past old stamps and paper clips, their edges worn smooth by decades of handling. He felt something different beneath them, a thick, textured envelope, tucked under a false bottom made of thin plywood. His brows furrowed as he pulled it out. His breathing shallowed to nothing. He pulled out the envelope and slid out a folded document. It was a bank statement from Swiss Alpine Trust, dated 3 months ago. 3 months after his father's death. Leo's eyes widened as he read. The logo, Swiss Alpine Trust, was embossed in blue ink at the top of the page. The balance was $450,000. Underneath, a list of transfers showed $50,000 being transferred monthly to an account ending in 8829. Leo knew that account number. It was Sarah's personal account. His sister Sarah, who had sat at his kitchen table 2 weeks ago with red-rimmed eyes, telling him, "Dad left nothing but debt, Leo. I'm paying for the funeral myself. There's nothing to inherit but bills." Leo's face turned pale. His jaw tightened. He looked at the number again. $450,000. It was circled in red ink. Someone, his father perhaps, had marked it deliberately. He picked up his iPhone 14 Pro from the desk with trembling hands. He tapped the contact Sarah and stared at the call button. His heart pounded visibly against his thin shirt. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room seemed impossibly loud. In the phone's screen, Sarah's contact photo showed her smiling, wearing a summer hat, her face open and guileless. "You liar," he whispered, his voice raspy and broken. That night, Leo drove to the Rusty Anchor bar in the industrial district, the bank statement folded into his jacket pocket. The letter felt like it was burning against his ribs. He found Sarah in a back booth, nursing a beer. She looked up as he approached, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition of the danger. But she took a sip of her drink anyway, her hand steady. Leo slammed the bank statement onto the sticky wooden bar top between 2 half-empty glasses of amber beer. Sarah flinched, her hand jerking and spilling a few drops of liquid. The overhead orange spotlight reflected in the spilled beer, making it glow like fire. "Explain the 450 grand, Sarah," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Explain why it's going to your account." Sarah's eyes darted to the exit. She tried to sweep the paper into her black leather handbag, but Leo pinned her wrist to the bar with his hand. His knuckles showed white as he gripped her. "It's not what you think," Sarah hissed, her breath coming through her nose in sharp bursts. "Dad wanted me to manage it because you're reckless." The lie sat between them like a living thing. A large man in a gray hoodie stood up from a nearby booth. His name was Mark, though Leo would only learn this later, and his face held the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having faced consequences. He walked over and placed a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder, squeezing the muscle. "Let go of her hand, friend," Mark said, his voice calm and dangerous. "Now." Leo spun around, throwing an elbow that caught Mark in the solar plexus. Mark wheezed, doubling over. Leo grabbed a glass bottle of Heineken and smashed the bottom against the bar edge. The glass shattered cleanly, leaving jagged edges that glinted under the bar lights. Mark recovered quickly, lunging forward with a tackle. Both men crashed into a wooden table, splintering the legs. Mark delivered 2 short, brutal punches to Leo's ribs. The pain was immediate and intense. Sarah screamed, pulling Mark back, her voice high and thin. "Stop it! Leo, get out of here before he kills you!" Leo spat blood onto the floor and stared at Sarah. And then he saw it. The thing that made everything click into place. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet on her left wrist. It was brand new. It wasn't there earlier when he'd seen her, when her sleeves were down. The diamonds flashed even in the dim light of the bar, catching the orange spotlight and throwing it back. "That's Dad's house on your wrist, isn't it?" Leo said, venomous. He staggered to his feet and walked out of the bar without looking back. The bartender was already reaching for his phone. Leo sat in the driver's seat of his old Ford Mustang, his chest heaving. Rain hammered against the metal roof with a sound like static. He reached into the glove box for a first aid kit, pressing his palm against the ache in his ribs, but his fingers hit something cold and plastic instead. He pulled out a cheap, black, prepaid Nokia flip phone. It was vibrating. The screen showed one new message from an unknown number. The blue-tinted screen light illuminated his bloody face in the darkness of the car. He flipped it open. "She's not just taking the money. Use the key at the bus station locker 412. J." Leo looked at the silver key he'd taken from the desk, still in his pocket. He started the engine. The V8 roared to life, a deep and primal sound. He shifted into gear, and the tires screeched on the wet pavement as he pulled away from the bar. In the rearview mirror, he could see the red and blue lights beginning to flash in the distance. 45 minutes later, Leo walked through the empty, echoing bus station toward the wall of lockers. His boots clicked on the linoleum. He found locker 412 mid-row, exactly as the text had promised. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and hummed, casting everything in a sickly pallor. The hum of a distant vending machine filled the space. Everything felt watched. He inserted the silver key and turned it. The locker popped open with a metallic clang that echoed through the vast space. Inside was a small black USB drive and a stack of passports. Blue passports, worn at the edges, stacked neatly on the cold metal shelf. Leo's hand moved toward them slowly, as if the act of touching them might make this all become real. A man in a leather jacket stepped out from behind a pillar. His hand held a short lead pipe, and he tapped it rhythmically against the metal lockers with a sound like a clock ticking toward something final. A second man approached from the opposite side, blocking the exit. His teeth were yellowed and crooked when he grinned. "Hand over the drive, kid," the first thug said, his voice gravelly and used. "It doesn't belong to you." Leo grabbed a heavy backpack from a nearby bench and swung it like a flail. It connected with the first thug's face, and blood sprayed from his nose. The man stumbled back, cursing, his hand flying to his face. The second thug lunged for Leo's throat. Leo ducked and grabbed the man's arm, using the man's own momentum to throw him into the open locker. The metal door edge caught the thug's forehead with a sound like a gong, and a circular dent appeared in the blue metal where his skull hit. Leo grabbed the USB drive and passports, stuffed them into his jacket pocket, and sprinted toward the side exit. The exit sign glowed in red neon ahead of him, and his boots pounded on the linoleum as the two men groaned on the floor behind him. Leo reached the public library just after midnight. The floors were quiet, the air cool and still. He sat in a dark corner, the glow of a computer monitor reflecting in his sweaty eyes. He plugged the USB drive into a generic Dell workstation and waited for it to load. The computer fan whirred. His fingers hovered over the mouse. The first folder was labeled Private. Inside was a document titled Loudon Contracts. Leo opened it. It was a list of life insurance policies. His father's name appeared on several of them, each one a separate page with dates and amounts. But the beneficiary for all of them wasn't Sarah. It was Mark Thorne, listed as primary beneficiary on every single policy. Leo whispered the words aloud in the empty library. He wasn't your boyfriend, Sarah. He was your boss. His fingers moved to the next file. The mouse wheel clicked. His breathing had become shallow and fast. He found a video file labeled August 14th. He double-clicked it. The video was grainy CCTV footage, the kind that came from an old security system. It showed his father's study. His father sat at his desk in his reading chair, a book open on his lap. And there was Sarah. She moved through the frame with calm purpose. She was holding something, a white packet, the kind you'd get from a pharmacy. She poured the contents into a teacup. White powder, fine and bright, swirling into the liquid. His father coughed in the background. The audio was muffled, but unmistakable. Sarah looked right at the camera. Her face was calm, cold, and absolutely clear. She had known it was there the whole time. Leo's hand moved to cover his mouth. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. I know you have the drive. Come to the old warehouse at the docks, or I call the cops and tell them you killed Dad. I have the witness. The text continued. I have the witness. Leo stared at the words on the screen. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. The battery warning chirped. The burner phone was dying. He closed the browser and left the library. The warehouse at the dock stood against the fog like a dark memory. Leo parked the Mustang 3 blocks away and approached on foot. The fog was thick and clinging, wrapping around his wool coat like something alive. He held a heavy iron wrench in his right hand, hidden by his sleeve. The fog was so dense that he could only see a few feet ahead. Yellow street lights filtered through the mist, creating halos of murky light. A distant foghorn sounded from somewhere out on the water. His own muffled breathing was the loudest thing in the world. Leo peered through a broken window pane. Inside, the warehouse was lit by a single work lamp. Sarah was sitting on a crate, smoking a cigarette. She looked bored, checking her watch as though they had an appointment she didn't particularly care about. Mark was nowhere to be seen. Smoke curled around the light bulb like something conscious. Leo stepped back from the window. That was when he heard the metallic click behind his head. The hammer being pulled back on a handgun. He froze, his entire body going rigid. His shadow on the brick wall became 2 shadows, one of him and one of Mark, with a gun to his head. Drop the wrench, Leo, Mark said from somewhere behind him. His voice was mocking. Gently. Leo let the wrench fall to the ground. It clattered on the damp concrete. Inside the warehouse, Leo was bound to a heavy metal chair with nylon rope. Mark stood behind him, the handgun now tucked into his waistband. Sarah stood in front, holding the USB drive she had taken from Leo's pocket. Her face was composed and cold. She wasn't angry. She wasn't anything. That was somehow worse. "You always were the good son, weren't you?" she said, her voice matter-of-fact, as though discussing the weather. "Dad was going to give you everything and leave me with his debts. I just restructured the plan." Leo lunged forward with the chair, toppling it. He slammed the back of his head into Mark's face. The man's nose exploded in blood with a wet crunch, and he fell back, dropping the gun. It clattered on the concrete floor. Sarah grabbed a heavy industrial stapler from a nearby desk and swung it at Leo's temple. He caught the blow with his shoulder, still tied to the chair, his muscles screaming. He used his legs to kick her hard in the shins. Sarah stumbled back, clutching her leg and grunting in pain. Mark crawled toward the gun. Leo, still in the chair, rolled his body toward the gun, pinning it under his tied arms just as Mark's hand reached it. Their hands met at the metal of the trigger guard, Mark's bloody fingers clawing at the floor beneath Leo's body, Leo's arms pressing down with all his remaining strength. The warehouse door creaked open. A woman in a dark raincoat walked in. High heels clicked on concrete. It was Julia, Leo's ex-fiancée. She was holding a folder of documents. Her dark lipstick was sharp and cruel. Her eyes were cold. Leo's breath caught. The smell rose up. Rust and decay and something older. Mark pushed the chair. Leo fell backward into the pit. The cold water hit his back, and he sank. The chair was heavy, pulling him down into the darkness. The surface of the water was still visible above him, growing smaller and smaller. His lungs were already beginning to burn. Upstairs, Sarah poured a jerry can of gasoline over the wooden crates. Julia struck a match and dropped it. The orange flame roared up instantly, consuming everything in its path. The warehouse's windows glowed with orange light, and the fire climbed toward the ceiling with a sound like the world ending. Underwater, Leo's eyes were open. Bubbles escaped from his mouth, rising toward the surface he could no longer reach. He saw a jagged, rusted pipe protruding from the basement wall. He thrashed his body, positioning the nylon ropes against the sharp edge. The chair sank deeper, the weight pulling him down into the cold and dark. His lungs burned. His vision began to blur. But he kept moving his body, kept positioning the rope against that jagged metal. Each movement sent jolts of pain through his shoulders. With a final violent jerk, the rope snapped. Leo kicked away from the chair. He pushed upward with the last of his strength. His muscles screamed. The surface seemed impossibly far away. But he was moving, his body propelled by pure desperation, by the simple animal refusal to die here in this dark water, at the hands of his own sister. He surfaced in the pit, gasping for air. His lungs were on fire. The room above was already filled with thick, black smoke. The orange light flickered down through the floor grate, growing brighter, more intense. The roar of the fire was deafening. His eyes stung as he took in the bitter smoke. Leo found a drainage tunnel at the water level. He swam into the cramped, slime-covered pipe, pushing through toward the moonlight he saw at the far end. The pipe was tight, barely wider than his shoulders. The walls were coated with something slick and ancient. His lungs were still burning, but the pipe was filling with smoke. He had to keep moving. His shoulders scraped against the metal. The pipe seemed to go on forever. But the circle of moonlight was growing larger, brighter. It was the entire world now, his entire focus, the only thing that mattered. He emerged from the drainage pipe onto the dock, gasping, covered in slime and ash and the detritus of the dead warehouse. He was alive. He was alive. Sarah, Julia, and Mark stood by Sarah's Mercedes, watching the warehouse burn. Mark had a fresh bandage on his nose. Sarah was holding a plane ticket, and her hand trembled slightly as she stared at the flames consuming everything they had planned. "To the airport, then," Sarah said, her voice satisfied. It's over. Leo emerged from the shadows behind the car, dripping wet, covered in soot and slime. He was holding the burner phone. He pressed a button, and the car's Bluetooth system picked up the signal. An electronic chime sounded. Sarah turned. Her face went white. Over the car's speakers, a voice played. It was Sarah's voice, from the warehouse interrogation. I just restructured the plan. Suicide is such a tragic end. Leo's voice came next. I set the burner phone to auto-upload to the cloud 5 minutes ago. The police have the video of the poisoning and the audio of this confession. He stood there, deathly calm, ghostly in appearance, his teeth white against the black soot covering his face. You recorded me, he said quietly. I recorded you. Mark reached for his knife. That was when the red and blue lights flooded the pier. 6 police cruisers screamed to a halt, boxing in the Mercedes. Officers emerged with guns drawn and flashlights blinding the trio. The lights swirled and danced, creating a kaleidoscope of chaos. Get down on the ground, the officers shouted, their voices overlapping into a cacophony of authority. Mark dropped the knife. Julia and Sarah put their hands up. A lawyer in a sharp suit, Mr. Henderson, stepped out from the lead police car. He walked toward Leo and Sarah. He was holding a single, small envelope. The law firm's crest was visible on the envelope. Henderson and Associates. I was instructed to deliver this only after the events of tonight were settled, Mr. Henderson said, his voice grave. Your father knew, Sarah. He opened the envelope and read aloud. To my children. The Swiss account was a test. It's filled with counterfeit bills. All the real money was donated to the city orphanage the day I was diagnosed. I wanted to see if you'd stay a family without the greed. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her body heaving with something between hysterical laughter and sobbing. The officers moved forward to handcuff her. Leo turned his back on his sister, back on his. He walked toward his Mustang, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. He pulled a small, worn photograph from his pocket. An old photo of him and Sarah as children, smiling, the sun bright behind them. He looked at it for a second, then dropped it into a puddle at the edge of the dock. The photograph sank slowly, the water turning the colors into something ghostly and strange. Goodbye, Sarah, Leo said quietly. You got exactly what you paid for. He opened the door to his Mustang and sat behind the wheel. He started the engine. The V8 roared to life. He shifted into gear and drove away from the docks, away from the burning warehouse, away from everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. He did not look back. The road stretched out before him, empty and dark, leading toward something he could not yet see. The Mustang's engine sang into the night, and Leo drove.